This is the Uptick Newswire Stock Day podcast, sponsored by InvestorsHangout.com and Equities.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes and YouTube to stay up to date on penny stock news and interviews, public information on OTC, pink sheets, and microcap stocks from around the world. With your host, Everett Jolly.
On today's show, I have a returning guest coming back, and he was on my show back in November 19th in 2018. We're talking about GNOL Inc. You can find them on the OTC markets under the ticker symbol GNOLF. And with us today is the CEO and chairman of the company, Mr. David Lifschultz. David, welcome back to the show. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
You put out a press release yesterday. Let's start with that. Bring us up to speed. What exactly did that mean to your investors and to my listeners?
Lloyd's Register is an independent organization that's very prominent in the shipping industry and an advisor to the International Maritime Organization. And they independently tested or observed a test of our desulfurization process where we reduced the sulfur levels from about 17,000 parts per million to less than 5,000 parts per million, which was within the regulations that are being implemented on January 1st, 2020 by the International Maritime Organization. This is a very important move from an environmental standpoint because the pollution from ships exceeded the pollution of the entire car industry of about 1.4 billion cars. So there was more pollution coming from the shipping industry than all the cars in the entire world.
Yes.
The effect of the sulfur in the environment and on the health is they attribute to about 400,000 deaths per year. So this will reduce the sulfur level so that the deaths will be sharply reduced. So it have a very positive impact. But as far as GNOL is concerned, we're getting a lot of publicity from our press release. We are getting a lot of inquiries from the shipping industry. There's so many coming in. It's taking all our staff to handle them. And so this test, this validation of our technology for the shipping industry, which was previously validated, it was not a question of validation in general because ConocoPhillips, we did a test with them, and we were found to be the best in the world for upgrading heavy oil into light oil. We did a test with Lukoil, and we were found to the best. We did a test for Aramco, and our study showed a process for converting Aramco's heavy oil into light oil of a 75% savings over anybody else. And the same savings would occur here in the shipping industry. So we're very excited about the validation through Lloyd's Register, and we think this is going to make a major impact on the shipping industry, which has about 53,000 ships in the merchant fleet alone that can avail themselves of our bunker fuel, reduced to the sulfur levels.
If you would, maybe bring myself and your investors and listeners up together, putting the deal together, still working on the Russia $35 billion deal. Where are we at in that process?
As far as this Astrakhan deal, the Astrakhan is a very major transaction. That's one of the deals that you had just mentioned. It's a oil field with 7,000 square kilometers. It has 1 billion tons of oil reserves, and recoverable reserves are 285 million tons. It can produce 500,000 barrels a day. These are all estimates. And we just had a meeting with a bank larger than J.P. Morgan Chase from China, and we had a meeting with one of the largest oil service companies that can handle the entire field development. And we had at that meeting ourselves, GNOL representing the group that's putting together the deal, and we had there also the ABF who owns the field itself. The presentation to this group was they were very, very interested, and they're going to be referring it to, that is the bank that's larger than JP Morgan Chase, it's Chinese, to one of the largest oil groups in the world, largest what they call integrated oil companies, one of the three largest in the world, and that's the next step for them to evaluate the results of this meeting and the results of the drillings, and we're hopeful that this project will move very, very quickly. What's very important about it from the Chinese standpoint is that we can pipe this 500,000 barrels a day via a Kazakhstan pipeline into China. And China has a desire more than anything else to pipe into their country, which is a lot cheaper than ships, but to pipe into their country the oil going from areas that are near them, rather than have to go thousands of miles over the seas,
right,
in order to obtain their oil supplies. So the fact that it can be piped to the Caspian Sea, but it also can be piped, and there's space on the pipelines for this, is very important to China. So they're very intensely interested in this field.
My guest today is GNOL Inc. You can find them on the OTC markets under the ticker symbol GNOLF. Their price is around 2 to 2.5 cents, market cap around 11 million. And you've been listening to the CEO and chairman of the company, Mr. David Lifschultz. David, let me ask you this. What's the big difference in your hydro conversion upgrader to maybe products already on the market? What makes it so special?
The key is there are other products on the market, but our conversion rates are nearly 90%. And sometimes over 90%. The competition is about 65 to 70%. So being able to convert more of the heavy oil to light oil, it makes it a much more efficient process, and it makes it much more profitable to use. Also, it's a very low cost. We have very low cost ways of doing it, and that's how Aramco determined that we were 75% cheaper than anybody else. I wanted to mention also on this broadcast that the rising oil price has what we interpret to be renewed a great deal of interest on the part of Aramco, who has called us. The project itself is on the desk of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Sultan, and we are now under active discussions because the kingdom is looking for large amounts of investment coming in, and the project would be for about $50 billion to develop their heavy oil fields in Saudi Arabia, which would include drilling the field, our upgrader converting the heavy oil to light oil, and desulfurized pipelines and the port facilities. This is a closed-loop type of transaction for Saudi Arabia because they gain sales. This is a 3.5 million barrel a day project. They would gain sales to China for 3.5 million barrels a day, so that they do not have to repay the $50 billion in cash to China. They can pay it back in kind, but based on a price that's agreed upon. At the same time as the entire project contracts are signed, contract would be signed for 30 years to ship 3.5 million barrels a day per day to China at a price off the spot price. So this is a very major deal. This also gives China a larger share of the Chinese growing demand for oil, and it fits into China's needs for oil, so it's very, very of great interest to China, so it's a win-win on both sides. Saudi Arabia doesn't necessarily have to go bidding around once they sign the contracts for bidding against other competitors for the Chinese market. They can lock it in with this deal, and at the same time, they do not have to come up with any money because the Chinese loans that would be made would be paid off in kind by selling the oil from this project to China directly at a price off the spot.
David, we're running out of time. I got one, maybe two questions I want to ask you. One, you've been a pre-revenue company for a long time. Where do you see revenue start trickling in on the company in 2019?
We see a lot of interest on a refinery project that we have in talks in Mexico. Also in Mexico, there is a lot of talk on 1 million barrels a day we're in discussions actively now, especially with the new administration in Mexico, to convert about 1 million barrels a day of heavy oil into light oil so they don't have to blend it with a diluent. So Mexico looks very, very strong right now for this year. Then also, as we discussed, Aramco looks like it's showing very great interest at this time to move forward, and we're in discussions with them. And then I think this project in Astrakhan in Russia is going to move very fast because it's a very ideal place and it's near pipelines, and China can generate 500,000 barrels a day overland to China for this project. So I think they're showing very great interest, and I think it's going to be one of those that could be finalized very much finalized in this year, like the others.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show. You've been listening to the CEO and chairman of the company, Mr. David Lifschultz. GNOIL Inc. trade on the OTC markets under the ticker symbol GNOLF. Take a look at them. I think they're underpriced here. They're in pre-revenues, but once things start to be generated, I think this market cap will blow up. David, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
This program is entirely sponsored and produced by Uptick Newswire LLC, which is responsible for the content. The opinions and information provided on this program are those of the guests and those of the respective companies they represent, and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff or management of Uptick Newswire. Uptick Newswire encourages all listeners of this program to do their due diligence and research when determining investment strategies that will work for them, or to seek the assistance of an investment professional. The guests of this program may have paid for its distribution and are not directly affiliated with Uptick Newswire or this station.